Maharani, the Mosaic Palace. This is a game that came out a couple of years ago. I hadn't heard about it until recently when I saw it in my friendly local game store, and I saw that the price was surprising. I thought maybe they mispriced it. It was about like $22, $23, which surprised me for a game with such a big box and that seemed to have so many nice, beautiful components. $22, $23, that's pretty much a small card game, a medium card game these days. So I was surprised and I wonder about it, and I imagine it's just that the game is a couple of years old and it hasn't become a classic. Otherwise maybe I would have heard about it before now. But it seemed beautiful. It was a little bit of an impulse buy just because it seemed so pretty and the price seemed to be affordable enough for me to do an impulse buy and decided to give it a try. What the heck. So I picked up the game, I played it, I tried it, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. In essence, it is an abstract game where you are building the mosaics that will decorate the floor of the Taj Mahal. In truth, again, it's an abstract game. The theme is not really there, mechanically speaking, but on the other hand, the theme justifies including really beautiful components in the game. This has to be one of the prettiest games that I own. But let's talk about gameplay now. Maharani. Here you have a general view of the board. As you can see, the board shows the floor where you will be placing the tiles that form the floor of the palace. The board is divided in 4 quadrants, and the players will sit around the board, of course, and they will use tokens to mark their positions. This is important because the orientation of game pieces is very important. And the center of the board, you see that rondel there, which really is the superstar of the game. That rondel tells you which tiles are available, and also the orientation marks who the active player is. The arrow is pointing towards the active player, and also gives you information about other game effects. Each player has a pool of workers, and each player also has 4 action tokens that come on this that you can place on this little tray here. They represent animals and they are associated with the quadrants. Each quadrant has an animal symbol. So for example, this is the monkey quadrant, and each player has an action token corresponding to that quadrant. There are always 4 tiles there in the middle of the board on the rondel, and tiles come from this bag here. And you draw tiles from here to replenish the area in the middle of the table. When it is your turn, you can do one of 2 things. One is to place 1 or 2 tiles from the central area into the quadrants, or you can refresh your action tokens. During the game, you will be spending your action tokens. Instead of placing new tiles, you spend your turn simply refreshing them and making them available for later. To place a tile, you simply pick it up, and usually you try to place it in the quadrant that the tile is facing. So this quadrant for this tile, this quadrant for this tile. And right now, I'm explaining things as if red was taking their turn. You can place them in other quadrants, but you need to spend an action token. If you spend the action token corresponding to the quadrant in which the tile is, then you get to place the tile in any of the other 3. So basically this tile, I can put it in this quadrant for free, or I can put it in any other quadrant if I exhaust my monkey tile, which is the one corresponding to that quadrant. When I place a tile, I can actually place it in any orientation I want, as long as I respect the general configuration of the columns on the map. These are columns, these black dots. I cannot cover columns, I cannot start half columns. I need to respect what the architects did. I'm just a guy, decorating the floors. So that would be a legal placement. When I place a tile and the arrow on the tile is also pointing at me, I get to put 1 of my workers on that tile. If that is the first tile of that color that I put on the board that has a worker of mine, if the first tile that I put on the board and there aren't any other of my workers on the board on tiles of that color, then I take the worker from my from my supply. If there already are tiles of that color on the board with my workers on it, then I take the worker from another tile of that color and I transfer it there. For example, if I had a blue tile here with my worker, then the worker will go there from here, not from here. And you can also then, after you do that, choose to place another tile, but it costs, if you want to place a second tile, it costs 2 gold pieces, which means 2 victory points. Gold and victory points are the same thing. So if you give up 2 victory points, you can place a second tile. You score points for placing tiles. For placing a worker is 1 victory point, for placing a tile is 1 victory point. However, if there are multiple tiles of the same color that are adjacent to one another, and you're adding to that configuration, then you're scoring points for the total. For example, let's say that this is the case, and later I'm placing this tile here. I'm not moving anybody. By placing this tile here, I score 2 points because it's 2 tiles. Suppose that I also then, suppose that this is the case, and I'm putting this tile here. I'm scoring 2 points for the pavement, but also 2 points for the workers. Basically, you score points for each configuration, line, group of tiles of the same color that you're adding to, and if by adding a piece, you're also moving a piece adjacent to other pieces of yours, a worker adjacent to other workers of yours, you also score points for the number of workers that you have. You're adding to a line that now has 3 workers, so then you score 3 workers. So you may be able to score, you always score at least a point for placing down a tile. You may also score a point in placing a tile, adds workers there, and then you add extra points for lines of workers adjacent to one another and lines of tiles adjacent to one another. Lines is probably not the correct word because they may be in different shapes, the configurations, but each group of adjacent tiles of a color or adjacent workers gives you extra points. When a quadrant is all completed, the quadrant is scored. You check the quadrant for scoring, and you get points. Each player gets points for the number of workers that they have in that quadrant. As you can see, there's quite a bunch of points that can be earned, but it can be tough because remember, basically, if you're adding a marker of a color, a tile of a color, and you already have somebody on that color, somebody on a tile of that color, you don't get to add a new person there. You simply transfer it. So you kind of have to play around with that idea. You're trying to score points by having nice lines and groups of workers and nice groups of tiles, but also you need to build up a critical mass of your workers in areas that you think will be scoring soon, because it can be pretty sweet indeed. The game continues like this, simply replenishing the rondel in the middle. Once a player took their turn, you turn it to the next player. As you can see, when you're placing tiles here, you always place them with the arrows for the tile pointing to the arrow on the arrows that is on the rondel, pointed to the player. Because remember, there is an advantage in putting stuff in the order and with the orientation of the tile facing you. So by having all of the tiles in the same way, you immediately know, well, if I take the tile from there and I put in the orientation which I'm seeing it right now, I get to place a worker on it. So that's a useful reminder, that's a useful thing to have during gameplay. Game goes around, so the options change because the tiles move around, and you continue playing like this until all quadrants are scored, and at that point the player with the highest total is the winner of the game. Now, the game doesn't have a great rating on BoardGameGeek, which is why probably the price is so low, has become so low. Materially speaking, I can't explain why this game would be so affordable otherwise, just because the components are so gorgeous and there's so much stuff in this box. And it's not like my game store was the only one that priced it that way. I mean, I looked online and copies are easily available in the $20 range, which is why I think maybe this review makes sense, even though the game is not new, because maybe you haven't heard about it, and this is a game that you can pick up without spending too much, and you have this beautiful, beautiful game. I can see why people would not enjoy it all that much, and I seem actually to have enjoyed it more than the average user of Board Game Geek. The game may look and may feel dry and repetitive. Yes, you are looking, you're placing a tile, put it there, put another tile there, that's it. There isn't anything else that you're doing. Once in a while you refresh your tiles, your action tokens, but you simply place tiles there. And it seems immediately a little obvious, more obvious than, say, Carcassonne, more obvious than other other games of this style where you score in a gazillion ways. You score only by having groups of tiles of the same color, groups of workers close to one another, and then at the end of the completion when a quadrant is complete. So you may feel repetitive, and you may feel that you do not have many moves to do because of the configurations of the columns. There are only some tiles that will go anywhere that makes sense on the board, and maybe you already have some of your action tokens that have been used up, so some placements are simply impossible. That reduces the number of options for you. So I see how at first sight the game may simply feel, well, there are 2 or 3 possible tiles, this one gives me a point more, why don't I do that? If you play with people like that, you'll probably be bored. I think that there is something here that needs to click with the players. The players need to realize that the immediate feedback that the game gives you, look, I score 3 points, it's better than scoring 2. The immediate feedback is not what the game is about. It really is about finding a balance between the immediate score that you get from placement of your things and the long time planning about the scoring of the quadrants, because that can be huge. So actually, if you're the one player that figured that out and you're playing with players that are just going for the next big amount of points that they can score this turn, you're gonna win. You're gonna win no problem. And maybe then a blindfold will fall from their eyes, and they will realize that the game is much more dynamic than it looks like, because you need to take into account the overall flow of the game, where things are going, and what are the quadrants that are going to score next. There's a quadrant that may be almost complete, and then all of a sudden people start piling up tiles on another quadrant, then everybody's rushing towards their quadrant to put their workers there. By the way, that's an excellent way of doing it, of course. You may even invest in some placements that are not advantageous to you by placing tiles that are not adjacent to anything, they don't score you much, but and that result in your workers not even being close to one another. So you're sacrificing a turn or two, and you still get a worker, a point for a worker, a point from a tile. It's not that you don't get anything, but the other player goes like 4 points, and you got 2 by placing a tile in the middle of nowhere with a worker in the middle of nowhere. It's not like you have been behind much, but that worker, when it comes to scoring a quadrant, may make a huge difference. So I actually found that there's this dynamic flow that you have with the migration of groups of meeples, if the players, again, in the right spirit, running for the next quadrant and trying to affect the timing of the quadrant, trying to make it score when the players are not there and you have a massive presence, and avoiding being in a quadrant that is not going to score. Again, ideally, yes, all of your people there, the quadrant scores is good. But what if the other quadrants score right away while your people are still there? So it's about managing, being in the right place at the right time. In that sense, the game has a component of timing and interactivity that I really found pleasant and that was not obvious to me. Even when I started playing the game, I was a little bored, annoyed, because everybody seemed to be scoring 2-3 points, 2-3 points, 2-3 points. You looked at the markers going on the turn track. It looked like an F1 race with the cars just one by one. And all of a sudden, people started jumping ahead, and because with larger configuration, then if you place a tile, well, you score 6 points if you're adding to a group of 5 tiles, for example. And you think that's going to get you ahead a lot, but if there are 6 tiles there and you score 6, next player is going to put a tile there, score 7, so it's only 1 point ahead of you. That is not how you gain a solid advantage. It is really about balancing those immediate term goals with scoring of the quadrants, which is entirely situational because by itself by yourself, you won't be able to score a whole quadrant to fill it up. I guess you can try, but by then you have invested too much in the long-term thing. So there's a sort of cooperation that you have to do there. It's not direct cooperation. You don't make deals, but you see what other players are doing, and you play around that to make sure that the quadrant scores at the right time for you. And then you immediately start transferring somewhere else, and you have to identify where it is the right time to transfer your workers, because you only have a very limited amount of those. I liked it. I liked it quite a bit. Again, more than the average board game geek user has from the comments that I've read. I respect them all. But it was, when they say things like it's too obvious, you just go, and if you can score a point more, why would you do anything else? I think that they may have missed something about the design. I think it's a design that may deserve a second look. Mind you, it's not like a total masterpiece even then, but it is a simple, accessible, abstract game that looks gorgeous, looks absolutely gorgeous. When you look at the board at the end, it's a beauty. It's a knockout of a game. It looks great. It is available out there for very affordable prices, and I find it quite enjoyable for a simple, light, fun, family style. Play with your spouse. Many gamers have spouses that play only light games and do not like confrontational games. There's a game which is about scoring points and trying to score more points at the opponent, but you're not attacking people and launching attacks with flaming swords and stuff like that. The interaction still feels quite pleasant, so that the game doesn't feel confrontational. There's some thinking involved in seeing what the rondel will go next and the resources that you're leaving for your opponents. There's some thinking, not too much thinking. There's some strategy, which is interesting and quite fun, but it's not overwhelming. Overall, I found it like a very simple, pleasant, abstract game that I think deserves a second look, deserves maybe a little more love than it has received in the last couple of years. Maharani.